The woman standing in the center of white oaks, New Mexico, had done nothing wrong except arrive 3 weeks before the creek dried up. And now the townspeople wanted her gone. Penelope Baines clutched her worn carpetbag to her chest as the crowd gathered around her in the dusty street, their faces twisted with fear and anger beneath the merciless August sun of 1883. She had come to this small mining town seeking nothing more than work as a seamstress, hoping to start fresh after her father's death left her with nothing but debts in Santa Fe. Instead, she found herself the target of desperate superstition. "She brought this curse upon us, old Mrs." Henderson shrieked, pointing a gnarled finger at Penelope. "The moment she stepped foot in our town, the rain stopped. The creek is nothing but cracked mud now." "My cattle are dying," another voice called out from the gathered crowd. "We need water, and she is the reason we have none." Penelope's throat felt as dry as the parched earth beneath her feet. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she was just a woman trying to survive, that she had no power over the weather, but the words stuck in her throat. These people had already made up their minds. Fear did that to folks. It made them search for someone to blame, someone to punish, as if driving her out would somehow bring the clouds back. That is nonsense. The voice cut through the commotion like a knife, deep and steady and absolutely certain. The crowd parted reluctantly as a tall figure strode forward. Penelope's eyes widened as she took in the man approaching. He wore dusty riding clothes and a weathered hat that shadowed a face carved from sun and wind. A worn gun belt sat low on his hips, but his hands hung loose at his sides, relaxed despite the tension crackling through the air. "Every ranch from here to Albuquerque is suffering from this drought. It has nothing to do with Miss Baines." "Stay out of this, Owen," a stocky man warned. Penelope recognized him as one of the miners who frequented the saloon. "This does not concern you." Owen Remington. The cowboy's name rippled through her mind as she stared at him. She had seen him around town during her brief time in White Oaks, always at the edges, quiet and observant. He worked at the Reynolds Ranch west of town, she had heard. A drifter who had shown up 2 years back and proved himself capable enough that old man Reynolds made him foreman. "It concerns me when innocent people are being terrorized based on foolish superstition," Owen replied, his gray eyes sweeping over the crowd with something that might have been disappointment. "We are better than this. All of us know the weather has been strange for months." The drought started back in May, long before Miss Baines arrived. "But it got worse when she came," Mrs. Henderson insisted stubbornly. Owen shook his head slowly. "The heat always gets worse in August. You know that. Blaming this woman will not bring rain. It will just make us cowards who attacked someone weaker instead of facing our real problems." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some faces showed shame. Others remained hard with fear and conviction. Penelope felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Come on," Owen said quietly, turning to her. His eyes were gentler now, though she could see the tension in his jaw. "Let me take you somewhere safe." "I have a room at the boarding house," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore, you do not." He gestured toward the building where she had been staying. Mrs. Pritchard stood on the porch, Penelope's few possessions in a heap at her feet. "I suspect your landlady shares the town's sentiments." Humiliation flooded through her, hot and bitter. In the span of an hour, she had lost everything again. The small life she had been trying to build had crumbled like the dried earth beneath their feet. "Stay with me." Owen's voice was low enough that only she could hear. "I have a cabin at the Reynolds place. You will be safe there until this madness passes." She should have refused. It was improper for an unmarried woman to stay with a man she barely knew. But as she looked at the hostile faces surrounding them, at the pile of her belongings discarded like trash, she realized she had no other choice. This stranger with the steady voice and kind eyes was her only lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. Owen gathered her scattered belongings with quiet efficiency, stuffing them back into her carpet bag and a worn saddlebag he produced from his horse, a sturdy sorrel mare tied near the general store. The crowd watched in sullen silence as he helped Penelope mount the horse, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to grip the reins, and she felt the solid strength of him at her back. "If the drought breaks while she is gone, you will all owe her an apology," Owen called out to the townspeople. Then he urged the mare forward, and they left White Oaks behind in a cloud of dust. The ride to the Reynolds ranch took nearly an hour across land so parched it seemed to cry out for mercy. Penelope had never been this close to a man before, never felt the heat of another body pressed against hers, the rhythm of his breathing, the flex of muscle as he guided the horse. It should have frightened her. Instead, she felt only a strange sense of safety, as if nothing could harm her as long as this man's arm encircled her waist. "I am sorry you had to endure that," Owen said after they had ridden in silence for some time. "People lose their reason when they are scared." "Have you ever seen a drought this bad?" she asked. "Once, when I was a boy in Texas. It lasted 2 years, broke my father's ranch." His voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the old pain buried beneath the words. "He put a gun in his mouth when the bank came to take the land." Penelope's breath caught. "I am so sorry. It was a long time ago." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "My mother and sisters and I moved in with my uncle in Kansas. Life went on. It always does, one way or another." "Is that why you came here, to start over?" She felt him shrug behind her. "I have been starting over my whole life. Never seemed to find a reason to stop drifting until recently." Something in his tone made her curious, but before she could ask what he meant, they crested a rise, and she saw the Reynolds ranch spread out below. It was more modest than she had expected. Just a weathered ranch house, a barn, a few outbuildings and corrals that held perhaps 24 head of cattle. The grass was brown and brittle, the water trough at the center of the main corral nearly empty. "The creek that feeds our well is down to a trickle," Owen explained as they rode in. "We have been hauling water from the Rio Benito, but that is starting to dry up too. Another few weeks and we will have to drive the herd north to find grazing." An older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He had the bow-legged walk of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. "Owen, did not expect you back until sundown. Change of plans, Mr. Reynolds." Owen dismounted and helped Penelope down, his hands steady at her waist. "This is Miss Penelope Baines. She needs a place to stay for a while. The folks in town have lost their minds." Reynolds studied her with sharp blue eyes, and she forced herself to meet his gaze despite her embarrassment. After a long moment he nodded. "The drought got them spooked, I reckon." "That is an understatement," Owen replied dryly. "Well, Miss Baines, you are welcome here as long as you need." Reynolds tipped his hat to her. "My wife passed 3 years back, so there is no woman of the house, but Owen's cabin is separate from the main house. Should be decent enough for propriety as far as that goes." "I am very grateful for your kindness," Penelope said softly. "I can work for my keep. I am an excellent seamstress, and I can cook and clean. We will work something out." Reynolds turned his attention back to Owen. "The north fence needs mending before the cattle break through and scatter to Kingdom Come. Take care of Miss Baines first, then head out there if you have time before dark." Owen nodded and gathered Penelope's belongings once more. She followed him past the main house to a small cabin set back among a cluster of scrubby trees. It was simple but solid, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. Inside, she found one large room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a few personal items that spoke of a man who traveled light through life. "I will sleep in the barn," Owen said, setting her bags down near the bed. "You can have this place to yourself." "I cannot take your home from you," she protested. "You are not taking it, I am offering it." He smiled for the first time, and the expression transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. "I have slept in worse places than a hayloft, I promise you. Besides, this way no one can say anything improper is happening." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I did not mean to imply that you would, I know." His voice was gentle. "But reputation matters, especially for a woman alone. This way yours stays intact." She studied him in the dim light of the cabin, this strange man who had appeared out of nowhere to defend her, who spoke of propriety and reputation while offering his own bed to a stranger. "Why did you help me? You do not even know me." Owen was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "I know what it is like to be blamed for things beyond your control, to have people look at you like you are cursed or dangerous just because circumstances aligned badly." He moved toward the door, then paused. "And I know what it is like to need someone to believe in you when the whole world has turned against you." After he left, Penelope sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Not from fear or anger, though she felt both of those things. She cried from relief and exhaustion and the overwhelming strangeness of her situation. A month ago, she had been in Santa Fe, caring for her dying father and trying to fend off his creditors. 3 weeks ago, she had arrived in White Oaks with hope and determination. This morning, she had woken believing she was finally building something stable. Now she was in a stranger's cabin on a dying ranch, with nothing but the clothes in her bags and the kindness of a cowboy she barely knew. But as she wiped her tears and began to unpack her few belongings, she found herself thinking of Owen Remington's steady voice, his calm strength in the face of the mob's anger, the way he had spoken of reputation and belief, as if they mattered more than convenience. She had been saved by many things in her 22 years, mostly by her own stubborn determination to survive. But this was the first time anyone had chosen to stand beside her when there was no benefit to them, only risk. The next few days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Penelope woke each morning to find fresh water in the basin on the porch, evidence that Owen had been there while she slept. She spent her days making herself useful, mending clothes for Mr. Reynolds and Owen, cooking meals that the men ate with obvious appreciation after months of their own rough bachelor efforts. The work felt good, purposeful, even as the heat pressed down like a weight, and the sky remained mercilessly clear. Owen rode out each day to tend the cattle, check the fence lines, and haul water from the shrinking river. He returned after dark, exhausted and covered in dust, but he always stopped by the cabin to check on her before heading to the barn. They fell into conversation easily, talking about small things at first. The weather, always the weather. The cattle. The town gossip that Reynolds brought back from his weekly supply runs. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Penelope told him about her father, a dreamer who had chased one failed opportunity after another until his health gave out. About growing up without a mother, learning to sew from a kind neighbor woman, keeping house for a man who loved her but could never quite manage to provide for her. About the fear that had gripped her when he died and left her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. Owen, in turn, spoke of his own past. Of growing up on the Texas ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, dreaming of the day he would run the place beside his father, of watching the drought destroy everything, slowly and inevitably as a creeping sickness, of finding his father in the barn that terrible morning and knowing in an instant that his childhood was over. "I was 16, he said one evening as they sat on the cabin porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. "Old enough to work but too young to hold the ranch together on my own. My mother tried to keep it going, but the bank would not work with a woman. They took everything within 6 months. That must have been unbearable," Penelope said softly. "The worst part was not losing the land. It was watching my mother's spirit break." He leaned back against the porch post, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "She was strong, capable, could outwork most men when it came to ranch business. But losing my father and then the ranch, it crushed something in her. She lived another 10 years, but she was never really alive after that. And your sisters, married and settled in Kansas. Good husbands, children, the lives they wanted." A slight smile crossed his face. "They have been after me to settle down for years. Keep sending letters introducing me to nice girls in their towns. Why have you not?" The question was out before she could stop it, too personal, too forward. But Owen did not seem to mind. "Because I never met anyone who made me want to stop moving." He turned to look at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Until recently." The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy with unspoken meaning. Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. She should look away, change the subject, retreat to the safety of propriety. Instead, she held his gaze and asked, "What changed?" "I watched a woman face down an angry mob without flinching. Saw her refuse to cry even though I could tell she wanted to. Watched her lose everything and then wake up the next morning determined to be useful, to earn her keep, to not be a burden." His voice was low and earnest. "That kind of strength is rare, Penelope, that kind of courage." No one had ever spoken to her like this, looked at her like this, as if she were something precious and remarkable. Her father had loved her, but he had been too lost in his own failures to really see her. The men in Santa Fe had viewed her as a commodity, a potential wife who came with debts instead of a dowry. But Owen looked at her like she mattered, like her strength and courage meant something. "I am not courageous," she whispered. "I am just trying to survive. That is what courage is. Keeping going when it would be easier to quit." He stood and stretched, breaking the intensity of the moment. "I should let you rest. Morning comes early." After he left, Penelope sat on the porch until full dark, thinking about his words, about the way her heart had raced when he looked at her, about the dangerous warmth growing in her chest. She barely knew this man. It was foolish to feel this way so quickly. But the heart, she was learning, did not always follow the rules of sense and propriety. The drought continued. Each day the sky remained that relentless, cloudless blue. Each day the heat hammered down. The cattle grew thin and listless. The well at the ranch dropped lower. Mr. Reynolds talked seriously about driving the herd north to Colorado, though they all knew the cattle were too weak for such a long drive. Desperation hung in the air like the dust that coated everything. Penelope made herself as useful as possible, determined to earn the refuge she had been given. She cooked, cleaned, mended, and took over the vegetable garden that had been struggling in the drought. With careful rationing of water and some clever shade cloth she fashioned from old blankets, she managed to coax a few plants back to life. It was not much, but it was something, a small victory against the relentless climate. Owen noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her, she realized. The way she bit her lip when concentrating on difficult stitching. The songs she hummed while cooking. The fact that she always saved the last of the coffee for him when he came back from long days riding the ranch, and she noticed things about him too. The scar on his left hand from a long-ago roping accident, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness in his calloused hands when he showed her how to properly handle a horse. They grew closer without quite acknowledging what was happening between them. A brush of hands when passing a plate at dinner, conversations that stretched later into the evening, the way her heart jumped when she heard his footsteps approaching, the way he found excuses to stay near the cabin when he should have been working elsewhere. 3 weeks after Penelope arrived at the ranch, Mr. Reynolds rode into town for supplies and returned with news. "Folks are still worked up about the drought," he reported over dinner that evening. "Someone suggested they should ride out here and demand we send Miss Baines away." Penelope felt her stomach drop. "I should go. I will not bring trouble to your doorstep." "You will do no such thing," Owen said firmly. "Let them come if they want. They will find this ranch defended." "Owen is right," Reynolds agreed. "I will not turn out someone under my protection just because frightened fools need a scapegoat. Besides, anyone with eyes can see you have been good for this place. The garden is producing again, the mending is done, and Owen here is actually eating proper meals instead of burnt beans and stale bread." Despite the fear curling in her gut, Penelope smiled at that. But the anxiety lingered. She did not want to be the cause of conflict, did not want Owen or Mr. Reynolds to suffer because they had shown her kindness. That night, she could not sleep. The heat was oppressive, the cabin stifling despite the open windows. Finally, she gave up and went to sit on the porch, hoping for even the smallest breeze. She was surprised to find Owen there, leaning against the railing, staring out at the dark landscape. "Could not sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned, and even in the faint moonlight she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Too much on my mind." She joined him at the railing, careful to maintain a proper distance even though everything in her wanted to move closer. "Are you worried about the townspeople coming here?" "I am worried about a lot of things." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Mostly I am worried about you. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but I do not want you to have to, not alone anyway." He turned to face her fully. "Penelope, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Her heart began to race. "All right. These past few weeks, having you here, it has changed everything for me. I wake up looking forward to the day because I know I will see you. I push through the hardest work thinking about sitting on this porch and talking with you in the evening. You make me want to build something permanent, something lasting." He took a deep breath. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment I saw you standing in that street, refusing to back down from people who wanted to hurt you." The words hung in the night air between them, terrifying and wonderful all at once. Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were not from sadness or fear. "I know it is too soon," Owen continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you barely know me, that you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand why I will defend you against anyone who tries to harm you, why I would do anything to keep you safe." "Owen." His name was barely a whisper on her lips. "I do feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is too fast, too dangerous to care this much. But I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel like I have finally found the home I have been searching for my whole life." He moved closer then, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative, as if she were something fragile that might break. But when she leaned into him, her hands gripping his shirt, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the rough, stolen kisses men had tried to force on her before. This was tender and passionate and full of promise. This was a kiss that spoke of partnership and respect, and a love that could weather any storm. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Penelope. I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever comes together." Joy flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally went to their separate sleeping places, both felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. Everything was different now. Everything was possible. The next morning, Mr. Reynolds took one look at them and started laughing. "Well, it is about time you two figured out what everyone else could already see. When is the wedding?" "As soon as we can arrange it," Owen replied, his arm around Penelope's waist. "If that is all right with you, sir." "More than all right. This ranch could use a woman's touch permanently, and I have been hoping Owen here would settle down." Reynolds clapped Owen on the shoulder. "We will go into town today and speak with Reverend Morrison. If the townspeople have a problem with it, they can answer to me." But when they rode into White Oaks that afternoon, the mood had shifted. Several of the buildings bore new flyers announcing a town meeting to discuss the drought situation. Small groups stood on street corners, talking in low, urgent voices. The hostility in the air was palpable. Reverend Morrison was sympathetic but cautious when they explained their desire to marry. "I have no objection personally," he said, his kind face troubled. "But there are those in town who still blame Miss Baines for our troubles. A wedding might inflame tensions further. Since when do we let superstitious fools dictate how decent people live their lives?" Owen asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I understand your frustration, son, but we must consider the safety of everyone involved." The Reverend looked at Penelope apologetically. "Perhaps it would be better to wait until the drought breaks, and if it does not break for months." "Years?" Owen shook his head. "No, Penelope and I are getting married, with your blessing or without it." Before the Reverend could respond, raised voices erupted outside. The three of them hurried to the window to see a crowd gathering in the street. At the center stood a man Penelope recognized as Jacob Turnbull, one of the largest landowners in the area. He was holding up what looked like a book, his face red with anger or excitement. "I found the answer in my grandmother's old journals," Turnbull was shouting. She knew the old ways, knew how to deal with cursed women who bring drought and pestilence. "We need to drive this woman out properly, with the right rituals, or the curse will never be lifted." Owen was out the door before Penelope could stop him, moving through the crowd with dangerous purpose. She followed with Mr. Reynolds and the Reverend close behind. Her heart pounded with fear, not for herself, but for what Owen might do to defend her. "That is enough, Turnbull," Owen said coldly, stepping between the landowner and the gathering crowd. "Take your superstitious nonsense and go home before someone gets hurt." "The only one who will get hurt is that which you are harboring," Turnbull snarled. "We all know she is staying at the Reynolds place. We all know you have been protecting her. Well, the protection ends now. Either you hand her over or we will come and take her." "You will try," Owen corrected, his hand hovering near his gun, "but I promise you it will not go the way you think." The tension ratcheted up instantly. Several men in the crowd moved their hands toward their own weapons. Penelope felt sick. This was exactly what she had feared, violence and bloodshed because of her. She could not let it happen. "Stop." She pushed past Owen to stand before the crowd. "Please stop this madness. I am not a witch. I have no power over the weather." I am just a woman trying to live her life. If my presence here troubles you so much, I will leave. I will go today, right now, and never return." "Penelope, no," Owen protested, but she held up a hand to quiet him. "I will not be the cause of violence. I will not let good people hurt each other because of me." She turned to face Turnbull directly. "I will leave peacefully if you promise to let me go without harm and to leave Mr. Reynolds and Owen alone. They only tried to help me. They have done nothing wrong." Before Turnbull could respond, a different voice rang out. "Wait!" An older woman pushed through the crowd, moving with surprising speed despite her age. Penelope recognized her as Agnes Porter, one of the few people in town who had not joined in the initial persecution. "Before we do anything drastic, someone should check the creek." "What are you talking about?" Turnbull demanded. "The creek has been dry for weeks. My grandson just came from there. He said there is water running again." A murmur rippled through the crowd, not much but definitely flowing. "And there are clouds building over the mountains to the west." Everyone turned to look. Sure enough, dark clouds were massing on the horizon, the first real cloud cover they had seen in months. As they watched, a cool breeze swept down the street, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of rain. The crowd's mood shifted instantly from anger to wonder to confusion. If the drought was breaking, what did that mean for their accusations against Penelope? Several people had the grace to look ashamed. "This changes nothing," Turnbull insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "She could still be cursed." "Oh, for heaven's sake, Jacob," Agnes snapped. "The girl is not cursed. You have been reading too many of your grandmother's old stories." The drought was a natural phenomenon, and it is ending naturally, just like every drought that came before it and every drought that will come after. "The woman is right," Reverend Morrison said, stepping forward with quiet authority. "We have let fear override our Christian charity and common sense. Miss Baines deserves an apology from all of us, not continued persecution." But Turnbull was not ready to concede. His face twisted with stubborn anger. "I do not care what you all think. That woman is trouble, and I will not rest until she is gone from here." Owen moved with sudden violence, grabbing Turnbull by the front of his shirt and slamming him against the nearest wall. "If you threaten her one more time, if you so much as look at her wrong, I will make you regret the day you were born. Do you understand me?" "Owen, let him go," Mr. Reynolds said sharply. "He is not worth it." For a long moment, Owen held Turnbull pinned, their faces inches apart. Then, with visible effort, he released the man and stepped back. "Stay away from her. Stay away from all of us." The confrontation ended without violence, but the tension lingered as the crowd dispersed. Penelope felt shaken and exhausted. Even the promise of rain, the vindication of knowing the drought was ending naturally, could not quite dispel the fear that had gripped her. True to Agnes Porter's word, the rain began that evening. First just a few drops, then a steady drizzle, then a proper downpour that soaked the parched earth and filled the air with the scent of wet dust. At the Reynolds Ranch, they stood on the porch of the main house and watched the rain come down, almost unable to believe it was real. "It is over," Mr. Reynolds said quietly. "The drought, the madness, all of it." But Penelope knew it was not quite over. Not until she and Owen were properly married, not until she had a legitimate place in this community that no one could question. "Reverend Morrison said he would marry us," she said softly. "Tomorrow, if we wanted." Owen took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Tomorrow it is, then." They were married the next afternoon in the small church, with Mr. Reynolds and Agnes Porter standing as witnesses. Reverend Morrison spoke of love and faith, and the importance of standing by one another through hardship. A few other townspeople attended, those brave enough to defy Turnbull's lingering disapproval. As Penelope stood beside Owen and spoke her vows, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the pain and struggle of her life had been leading to this moment. When Owen slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, a band that had belonged to his mother, she saw tears in his gray eyes. "I promise to love you and protect you for as long as I live," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise to be the home you have been searching for." "And I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," she replied. "I promise to be your partner, your friend, your love for all the days of our lives." Their kiss as husband and wife was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they emerged from the church into the sunlight, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled fresh and clean. The world felt new, washed clean of the old fears and superstitions. They spent their wedding night in Owen's cabin, which was now their cabin, and it was everything Penelope had dreamed of, and nothing she could have imagined. Owen was gentle and patient, taking his time to learn what pleased her, showing her with his body what his words had already expressed. This was not just physical joining, but a melding of souls, a confirmation of the bond that had been growing between them since that first day in town. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Penelope felt a peace she had never known. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied, his hand stroking her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." The weeks that followed were busy ones. The rain continued sporadically, not enough to end the drought completely, but enough to give hope. The creek began flowing again. The cattle started to regain their strength. The garden flourished under Penelope's care, providing fresh vegetables that made meals more varied and nutritious. Penelope threw herself into making the cabin a real home. She sewed curtains for the windows, braided a rug for the floor, and filled the space with small touches that made it warm and welcoming. Owen watched these transformations with obvious pleasure, often commenting that he had never imagined his rough cabin could feel so much like a real home. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Working side by side came naturally to them, whether it was mending fence, tending the garden, or managing the daily tasks of ranch life. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of shared life that bound them closer together. But not everything was peaceful. Jacob Turnbull remained hostile, spreading rumors and trying to turn other ranchers against the Reynolds place. Most people ignored him, especially as the drought continued to break and crops began to recover, but his animosity was a shadow over their happiness. The confrontation came 3 months after the wedding. Owen was out checking the north pasture when Turnbull rode onto Reynolds' land with 2 of his hands. Penelope was hanging laundry when she saw them approaching, and fear spiked through her. Mr. Reynolds was in town, and she was alone. "Well, well," Turnbull said, dismounting with deliberate slowness. "The witch bride all alone. Where is your protector now?" Penelope forced herself to stand tall, not to show the fear coursing through her. "My husband will be back soon. You should leave." "I do not think so. I think it is time we had a little talk about you leaving this territory for good." He moved closer, and his men spread out to flank him. "Your presence here is still causing problems, no matter what the fools in town think." "The only problem is your unreasonable hatred," Penelope replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have done nothing to you or anyone else. You bewitched Owen Remington, turned a good man into a fool willing to throw away his reputation for a woman with evil in her blood." Turnbull's face was red with anger. "Now you will pay for that." He lunged toward her, but Penelope was ready. She had been raised by a father who could not always protect her, and she had learned early to defend herself. She ducked under Turnbull's grasping hands and brought her knee up hard between his legs. He went down with a howl of pain and rage. His two ranch hands started forward, but the sharp click of a rifle being cocked stopped them cold. Agnes Porter stood at the edge of the property, her husband's old hunting rifle aimed steady and true. "I suggest you boys get your boss back on his horse and ride out of here before I forget I am a Christian woman," she said calmly. "This is not your concern, old woman," one of the hands protested. "It became my concern when you decided to attack a defenseless woman on her own property. Now move, or I start shooting. And fair warning, my eyesight is not what it used to be. I might miss and hit something vital by accident." The hands exchanged uncertain glances, then helped the still groaning Turnbull back onto his horse. As they rode away, Turnbull called back over his shoulder, "This is not over." "It better be," Agnes shouted after him, "or next time I will not be aiming to miss." After they disappeared from view, Penelope sagged against the porch post, shaking with reaction. Agnes set the rifle down and put a steadying arm around her shoulders. "You did good, girl. Handled yourself well. Thank you for coming. How did you know?" "I saw them riding this direction when I was coming back from visiting my daughter. Figured they were up to no good." Agnes guided her into the cabin and sat her down. "I will stay until Owen gets back." When Owen returned an hour later and heard what had happened, his face went white with rage and fear. He pulled Penelope into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I should have been here. I should have protected you." "I protected myself," she said gently, pulling back to look at him. "And Agnes helped. I am all right, Owen, but we need to do something about Turnbull before this escalates further." "I will kill him," Owen said flatly. "I will ride over there right now and know." Penelope put her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to look at her. "You will not become a murderer because of me. We will handle this the right way, through the law." But the law in White Oaks was limited. The sheriff, a man named Tom Garrett, listened to their complaint but was reluctant to act against Turnbull. "He is one of the most powerful men in the territory," Garrett said uncomfortably. "Without proof of actual harm, my hands are tied." "So Penelope is supposed to wait until he actually succeeds in hurting her before you do anything?" Owen demanded. "I will have a talk with him, warn him to stay away. But that is all I can promise." It was not enough, but it was all they had. Owen hired 2 of Mr. Reynolds's cowhands to stay near the cabin when he had to be away, a precaution that chafed at him, but that Penelope accepted as necessary. She hated living with this shadow of threat hanging over them, hated that their happiness was compromised by one man's irrational hatred. But as fall turned to winter, Turnbull made no more direct moves against them. The sheriff's warning, combined with the fact that the drought had fully broken and crops were recovering throughout the territory, seemed to have taken the wind out of his vendetta. Life at the Reynolds Ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. Winter in New Mexico was cold but bearable. Penelope and Owen spent long evenings by the fireplace, talking and reading and simply enjoying each other's company. They made plans for the future, discussing everything from expanding the ranch's cattle herd to the possibility of children. It was on a particularly cold January night, as they lay tangled together in their bed, that Penelope told him she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before saying anything. Owen's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with joy, and he pulled her close, raining kisses over her face and neck. "A baby," he kept repeating in wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive. Tears of joy streamed down her face. I am the lucky one. You saved me, Owen. You gave me a life when I had nothing. We saved each other, he corrected gently. That is what love does. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Penelope bloomed with health despite the discomforts, and Owen hovered over her like a mother hen, driving her to distraction with his constant concern. Mr. Reynolds was delighted by the news, already making plans for how to convert one of the ranch's outbuildings into a larger home for the growing family. As her belly swelled with new life, Penelope felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. The work of ranch life continued around her, but Owen insisted she take on only the lightest tasks. She spent her days sewing baby clothes, tending the garden, and preparing for the arrival of their child. News of the pregnancy spread through White Oaks, and to Penelope's surprise, several of the women who had been part of the mob that first day came to visit, bringing gifts and apologies. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had initially called her cursed, arrived with a beautiful hand-knitted baby blanket and tears in her eyes. I am so ashamed of how I treated you, the old woman said, her voice breaking. Fear made me cruel, and I will regret it for the rest of my days. You have been nothing but a blessing to this community, and I hope someday you can forgive me. Penelope, who had learned the power of forgiveness from Owen's gentle example, embraced the woman. I forgive you. Fear makes us all do things we regret. What matters is that we learn and grow from our mistakes. One by one, the townspeople who had turned against her came to make amends. Some brought gifts, others simply offered apologies and well wishes. It was a healing process not just for Penelope, but for the entire community, which had been scarred by the drought and the superstitious madness it had inspired. Only Turnbull remained hostile, but even his influence had waned. Most people now saw him as a bitter man clinging to irrational hatred, and they distanced themselves from his vendetta. He stayed on his own land, nursing his grievances, and left the Reynolds ranch alone. In late August, almost exactly a year after Penelope had first arrived in White Oaks, she went into labor. Agnes Porter came to assist, along with the local midwife, while Owen paced outside the cabin like a caged animal. Mr. Reynolds tried to distract him with work, but Owen could focus on nothing but the sounds coming from inside, the occasional cry of pain that tore at his heart. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Owen thought he might go mad with worry, with the helplessness of being unable to do anything to ease Penelope's suffering. But finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the thin wail of a newborn baby pierced the evening air. Agnes emerged from the cabin with a tired smile. You have a son, Owen. A healthy, strong boy with a good set of lungs on him, and Penelope is tired but doing well. Owen did not wait to hear more. He rushed into the cabin to find Penelope propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in Mrs. Henderson's blanket. When she looked up at him, her eyes were filled with a love so profound it made his chest ache. Meet our son, she said softly. Owen approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his mother's delicate features, and Owen fell in love instantly and completely. He is perfect, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. You are perfect. Thank you, Penelope. Thank you for this gift. She smiled tiredly. I was thinking we could name him Samuel after my father, and Owen for his middle name after you. Samuel Owen Remington. He tested the name and found it good. I like it. I like it very much. He spent the rest of the evening sitting beside the bed, holding his wife's hand while their son slept peacefully in her arms. This moment, he thought, was worth every hardship he had ever endured. Every loss, every difficulty, every lonely year of drifting had led him here, to this woman and this child and this profound sense of belonging. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Samuel was a demanding baby, waking frequently through the night and requiring constant attention. But Owen embraced fatherhood with the same steady dedication he brought to everything else, waking with Penelope for nighttime feedings, learning to change diapers and soothe crying fits, and watching his son with an expression of perpetual wonder. Mr. Reynolds doted on the baby, delighted to have a child on the ranch again after so many years. The old man could often be found sitting on the porch, holding Samuel and telling him stories about the old days, even though the baby was far too young to understand. It brought tears to Penelope's eyes to see how much joy her son brought to everyone around him. As Samuel grew and began to smile and recognize faces, the hard months of pregnancy and difficult labor faded in Penelope's memory. She and Owen fell into the rhythms of parenthood, learning to navigate the balance between ranch work, marriage, and caring for their son. It was not always easy, but they faced each challenge together, and their love only deepened through the shared experience. 2 years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Samuel took his first steps, spoke his first words, and developed a personality that was part his mother's determination and part his father's steady calm. The ranch prospered as the drought years receded into memory, and Mr. Reynolds began to talk seriously about leaving the place to Owen when he passed, wanting to see it continue in good hands. Penelope found herself pregnant again when Samuel was 2.5. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when their daughter was born in the spring of 1887, the labor was mercifully shorter. They named her Rose, and she had Owen's gray eyes and Penelope's auburn hair, a perfect combination of both parents. With 2 young children and a thriving ranch, life was full and busy and occasionally overwhelming. But it was also rich with love and laughter, and the satisfaction of building something lasting together. Penelope would sometimes stop in the middle of a busy day and just look around at what they had created. The cabin that had become a real home, filled with the sounds of children playing, the garden flourishing under her care, the cattle grazing contentedly in fields that had once been parched and dying, and most of all, Owen, her partner and love, working beside her to build their future. One evening, when Samuel was 4 and Rose was 18 months old, Penelope and Owen sat on their porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. It was a peaceful moment, rare and precious, and Penelope found herself thinking back to that terrible day in town when the mob had blamed her for the drought. "You ever think about that first day?" she asked Owen. "When you defended me in the street?" He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes. I think about how close I came to not being in town that day, how easily I could have missed everything. What made you speak up? You did not know me. You had no reason to risk yourself for a stranger." "I knew what was right," he said simply. "And I knew I could not live with myself if I stayed silent while innocent people were hurt." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But I am glad I did more than just speak up. I am glad I invited you to stay with me." "That was nonsense, you know," she said with a smile, remembering his words to the crowd. "The best nonsense anyone ever spoke on my behalf. The best decision I ever made was asking you to stay with me." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Everything good in my life comes from that moment." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Samuel was showing Rose how to stack rocks, his young face serious with concentration, while Rose babbled happily and knocked the rocks over as fast as he could stack them. It was a simple scene, but it encapsulated everything they had built together. Family, love, hope, and a future that stretched out before them full of possibility. Over the years that followed, their family continued to grow. A third child, a boy they named Henry, arrived when Rose was 3. Then another daughter, Clara, 2 years after that. The cabin became too small for their expanding family, and with Mr. Reynolds's blessing, they built a larger house on a different part of the ranch, saving the cabin as a special place, a reminder of where their love had begun. Mr. Reynolds passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1892, leaving the ranch to Owen as he had promised. It was a sad time, but the old man had lived to see the land he loved thriving and in good hands, and he had spent his final years surrounded by the laughter and chaos of children who adored him. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Penelope planted wildflowers on his grave that bloomed every spring. Running the ranch was a huge responsibility, but Owen proved more than capable. He had learned well from Reynolds, and he brought his own innovations and improvements to the operation. The ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the best managed and most productive, a testament to Owen's skill and dedication. Penelope continued to be Owen's partner in every sense. She managed the household and children, but she also kept the books, negotiated contracts, and had a keen eye for which cattle would bring the best prices at market. People in White Oaks came to respect her as much as they respected Owen, and the story of how she had been wrongly blamed for the drought became a cautionary tale told to teach children about the dangers of superstition and mob mentality. Jacob Turnbull eventually moved away, his own ranch failing due to poor management and his inability to adapt to changing times. He left without saying goodbye to anyone, a bitter man who had wasted years nursing grievances instead of building something positive. Penelope felt a surprising amount of pity for him, understanding that his hatred had poisoned only himself. As their children grew, Penelope and Owen took care to teach them about resilience, kindness, and the importance of standing up for what was right. They told them the story of how they met, of the drought, and the superstition, and the cowboy who said it was all nonsense. The children loved the story, especially the part where their mother had defeated the bad man who threatened her, and their father had been brave enough to defy the whole town. Samuel grew into a fine young man with his father's steadiness and his mother's determination. He took naturally to ranch work and seemed destined to carry on the family legacy. Rose became a spirited, independent girl who could ride as well as any of the ranch hands, and who had a particular talent for training horses. Henry was quiet and bookish, more interested in learning than in cattle, and they encouraged his education with the same enthusiasm they showed for the others' ranching skills. Clara, the baby, was still young, but she showed signs of having inherited her mother's skill with numbers and her father's calm temperament. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the cattle prices fell, years when illness swept through the herd, years when storms damaged buildings and required expensive repairs. But Penelope and Owen faced each challenge together, and their love never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experience and the life they had built together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Penelope by taking her back to the old cabin. He had arranged for the children to stay with friends in town, giving them a rare night alone. The cabin had been kept up over the years, used occasionally by ranch hands or as a retreat when they needed quiet time, but it looked much as it had that first night when Owen had given her refuge. "Do you remember that first evening?" Owen asked as they sat on the familiar porch, watching the sunset just as they had done so many times before. "You were so frightened, so determined not to show it." "I remember thinking you were either the kindest man I had ever met or the most foolish," Penelope replied with a soft laugh. "Risking yourself for a stranger everyone else wanted gone. Not foolish, just following my heart, even though I did not quite understand it yet." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the gold band he had placed there 2 decades ago. "You know what I realized that first night, when I saw you standing in that street, refusing to back down even though you were terrified? I realized I had been waiting my whole life to meet you. I just had not known it until that moment." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes. "I thought I had lost everything when I came to White Oaks. My father was dead. I had no money, no prospects, no family. And then the town turned on me and I truly believed I had nothing left. But I was wrong. I had not lost everything. I had just not found you yet." They sat together in the fading light, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible day in the dusty street to this moment of profound contentment, it had been a remarkable journey. There had been hardship and fear and moments when the future looked bleak. But there had also been love, steadfast and true, that had carried them through everything. "Thank you," Penelope whispered, leaning her head against Owen's shoulder. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else only saw someone to blame. Thank you for believing in me when I barely believed in myself. Thank you for loving me." "It was never a choice," Owen replied, kissing the top of her head. "From the moment I saw you, there was never any question. You were mine and I was yours, and nothing was ever going to change that." They stayed in the cabin that night, making love with the passion and tenderness that had sustained them through 20 years of marriage. In the morning, they would return to the big house, to their children and the responsibilities of the ranch and the busy life they had built. But for this one night, they were just Owen and Penelope again, the cowboy who had defended a stranger and the woman who had been blamed for a drought. 2 souls who had found each other in the midst of crisis and built something beautiful from the ashes of fear and superstition. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren, more challenges, more triumphs. Samuel married a lovely girl from town and gave them 3 grandchildren. Rose married a rancher from a neighboring spread, combining their lands and creating one of the largest operations in the territory. Henry went east to college, became a teacher, and eventually returned to New Mexico to start a school in White Oaks. Clara, their youngest, was still finding her way, showing promise in both ranch management and business. As Owen and Penelope grew older, they began to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting their children take more responsibility. But they never fully retired. The ranch was in their blood, as much a part of them as their love for each other. They could often be found walking the property together, hand in hand, pointing out changes and improvements, remembering the early days when it had just been the 2 of them, and Mr. Reynolds building something from almost nothing. On a spring evening in 1910, as they sat on the porch of the big house watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Penelope reflected on the incredible journey their lives had been. She was 69 years old now, her auburn hair silver, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Beside her, Owen at 71 moved a bit slower, his gray hair matching hers, but his eyes were still that same steady gray that had looked at her with such conviction all those years ago. "You have any regrets?" she asked him, a question she had never thought to ask before. Owen was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he shook his head. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you and to this life. How could I regret any of it? I used to wonder what would have happened if the drought had never come, if the townspeople had never blamed me, if you had not been there that day, Penelope admitted. But I have realized that wondering about what might have been is pointless. This is the life we have, the life we built together, and it is more than I ever dreamed possible. We were meant to find each other, Owen said with quiet certainty. The drought, the superstition, all of it was just the universe's way of bringing us together. I do not believe in much when it comes to fate or destiny, but I believe in us. I believe we would have found each other somehow, some way, no matter what. As the sun set over the land they loved, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink and gold, Penelope and Owen sat in comfortable silence, their hands clasped, their hearts at peace. Around them, their grandchildren played and laughed, carrying on the legacy they had built. The ranch stretched out in all directions, green and thriving and full of life, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over fear, hope over despair, and partnership over isolation. That night, as they lay in bed together, Penelope whispered into the darkness, "I love you, Owen Remington. I have loved you from the moment you said that blaming me was nonsense and asked me to stay with you. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Penelope Remington," he replied, pulling her close. "You are my home, my heart, my everything. Thank you for staying with me all these years." They fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had done for nearly 5 decades. Two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And if anyone in White Oak still remembered the drought of 1883, they remembered it not as a time of fear and superstition, but as the summer when Owen Remington found his true love and proved that courage, kindness, and love could overcome even the darkest of times.